So, hi everyone, and thank you for being here for this workshop webinar about the language use aspect of the TOEFL speaking section. So, my name is Jonathan, and I'm an English teacher and TOEFL coach. I've been teaching for 25 years now, and helping lots of students with their TOEFL preparation, students from all around the world. Personally, I've taken the exam and I've managed to get a 30 out of 30 on the speaking section. And I do a lot of speaking evaluations, essay evaluations as well, and helping students with all four sections: reading strategies, listening strategies, note-taking. And usually I give a lot more emphasis to the delivery aspect, pronunciation, intonation, but it has come to my attention that I wanted to share more resources specifically for the grammar, vocabulary, the language use, since it's not enough just to mention like study grammar and what grammar specifically, and sentence structure, sentence variety, what is necessary to know for the test. Okay. If you have questions, feel free to put those in the chat box. I'll keep an eye on those as well. Okay. Okay. So going to the speaking section rubrics, how you are being evaluated, we can see that the highest score, 4 out of 4. In the general description, it says that the response fulfills the demands of the task with at most minor lapses in completeness. It is highly intelligible, exhibits sustained, coherent discourse, and a response at this level is characterized by all the following. The all refers to delivery, language use, and topic development. For today, we're mostly interested specifically in this language use element, which has the description: the response demonstrates effective use of grammar and vocabulary. It exhibits a fairly high degree of automaticity with good control of basic and complex structures as appropriate. Some minor or systematic errors are noticeable, but do not obscure the meaning. So I've put in bold some key words that caught my attention, is that you're using grammar and vocabulary effectively. And the idea of automaticity is that you can speak without realizing that you're using correct grammar. I often refer to the learning process for driving a car, how at the beginning, people have to really concentrate. What are you doing with your hands? What are you doing with your feet? And to move the car, and then eventually once you're moving the car around like a parking lot or a quiet neighborhood, and then eventually you can automate those processes. You don't have to be thinking every single step of the way that you're driving to get somewhere. You end up at some point being on autopilot, and you can move the car. You're not thinking consciously about what your hands and feet are doing. You then move on to automating those processes. Okay, so speaking and grammar, that needs to follow a similar process as well, that you are able to speak, think, without having to focus on what is that subject and verb agreeing. Are you using the right tense? Is that the right vocabulary word? Those things need to be automated. You need to be a little bit more on autopilot for that your grammar not to become an issue. And then once you get your grammar and vocabulary under control, you can then move on to using it effectively. So And also these highest scores, it says a basic and complex structure. We'll get to that in terms of what is a basic sentence structure, what is a complex sentence structure. And this comment about as appropriate means that you're able to adapt and switch between the sentence structures, because if all of your sentences are simple, or I mean simplistic or basic, that might show a lower level of English. But on the opposite side, using only complex and complicated sentences, it may sound like you're trying to impress the evaluator, but you need to find this balance of basic and complex. That's where it says this kind of appropriate. Okay. They do tolerate some minor mistakes as long as we understand what you're trying to say, that message. So some students think that this description means you have to have perfect grammar, flawless grammar, that you can't make mistakes. That's not what they're saying. There is some tolerance for small mistakes, which is common when students are speaking under pressure with a 45-second, 60-second timer, and you only see the question for the first time during the test, and you're given a lot of information to take notes on in the campus-related announcement, the lecture ones, questions 3 and 4. You have more information than you could deliver, so you have to filter the information and be very skillful at adapting this information, reformulating it, paraphrasing it. So you want to have your language use aspect under control so it does not become an issue, and that it allows you to have good topic development and good delivery. So your language use is a foundation for your answer in terms of your English level is good, and especially since the TOEFL is assessing your academic level of English, not only do you need a basic usage of English, you also need to be showing that you can use an academic level of English, which is going to be very frequent once you get to the university. Now, the next level, the 3, the general description here says, sorry, here. Some of these pop-up windows, I'm sorry. So the response addresses the task appropriately, but may fall short of being fully developed. It is generally intelligible and coherent with some fluidity of expression, though it exhibits some noticeable lapses in the expression of ideas. The response at this level is characterized by at least 2 of the following. So these details start to get a little bit more into the topic development where it's not fully developed or there's lapses. In the 2 of the following, usually I see that being the language use and the topic development. And specifically here for language use, it says the response demonstrates fairly automatic compared to effective use and effective use of grammar and vocabulary, and fairly coherent expression of relevant ideas. And a response may exhibit some imprecise or inaccurate use of vocabulary or grammatical structures, or be somewhat limited in the range of structures. This may affect overall fluency, but it does not seriously interfere with the communication of the message. So we've gone from like a high degree of automaticity to, well, fairly automatic. So we might start to hear some hesitations when somebody is conjugating a verb or looking for their vocabulary words. Maybe the vocabulary word that they're looking for is not the best word, might not be very precise related to this topic. So the vocabulary range is also something to consider here, because there might be vocabulary that is basic standard English, then there might be something more appropriate for like academic vocabulary. There might be even a lower level slang vocabulary and I generally discourage students from using slang words like stuff or kids when there might be more appropriate words for a topic. So also in here, they're mentioning a limited range of structures. So we'll get into those sentence structures and noticing how the other ones had basic and complex. And I sometimes hear students struggle with these complex structures, and it might reflect more of this limited range. Okay. Again, they do tolerate some mistakes as long as it doesn't make the meaning obscure, that we don't understand what you're saying, or as long as it doesn't seriously interfere with that understanding and the communication message. So if we can understand you, but there's a few grammatical mistakes or imprecise use of vocabulary, there's still some tolerance there. But overall, the quality of this 3 is lower than that 4. Okay. Now, next to me, I do have a stack of books, grammar books, and things related to vocabulary and grammar and writing that I've used over the years. And so a few of these things, and I will mention them in a like bibliography part here with links to the kinds of books that I'm recommending. And so, first of all, a dictionary, that for your vocabulary, especially a monolingual dictionary. This is an English dictionary. So I do see a lot of students mainly using bilingual dictionaries. That means that it's from English to their native language. And if not only are they using a bilingual dictionary, I do see lots of students on their cell phone or their computer using something like Google Translate. Yet when they do that, it lacks a lot of context. We don't have a lot of details, the definition, and with a very limited kind of bilingual translation, we get just the essentials. But for being more effective with your vocabulary, I would recommend using a monolingual dictionary that has the words in English and the definitions in English. And things, usage notes, they show you how to use that vocabulary word in an example sentence, in different contexts when it's appropriate. We have a word called connotation. That's when you are kind of a certain meaning that's associated in certain contexts. So a dictionary is definitely something to have. And there are different types of dictionaries. There can be like, this is a big one that I had growing up. And this one I still use as a teacher. There are smaller ones like this, kind of this Oxford kind of learner's dictionary. It's very limited. Still, it is only in English, and it is a good way to get started on being able to take vocabulary words, find their definitions, and still stay within English. If you're constantly translating back and forth between your native language to English, that adds an extra step in your thinking process. And when you're being recorded for 45 seconds, 60 seconds, you want to be more immersed in English, not back and forth on the translation. I see that with some students where that slows them down with their thought process. And when you're on the exam, like the TOEFL, you need to be performing at a high level, as we can see here in this high level of automaticity. You don't want to be conscious of your thought process, looking for vocabulary words and hesitating with your grammar. You want to be able to do this on autopilot. So these are things like the dictionary. If you struggle with grammar, there are books like the Good Grammar book that I recommend, the English Grammar in Use by Raymond Murphy. There's an Essential Grammar in Use. There's a whole series of these grammar in use books. You can find those on Amazon. This one called The Little Brown Book. This one was in my first year at the university, and it's an extremely detailed kind of a guide for grammar at the native language level, like a C1, C2 usage of English. And this is what I used in my kind of English 101, even as a native speaker, just because I finished high school and was able to speak, read, write, listen in English, it did not necessarily mean that suddenly the moment I walked into a university class that I was now capable of writing college essays. I was able to write high school level essays, but this book really taught me the essentials of the academic level of writing. And if you're really interested in that high level of English, I would highly recommend getting a copy of this little brown book. You can find also PDFs on the internet of previous editions. And it still has like a very detailed table of contents of these different concepts to learn. I'm not going to be going through that level of detail, but I'll be looking at some of the main concepts. And there are these books like The Elements of Grammar. This is even kind of a very small kind of a book that people would have on their desk. Even native speakers would hesitate once they learned the basics of grammar when they were in elementary school, but maybe you get to the level of an adult and you forget, how do I use that? What's a better way to phrase it? So even native speakers can be hesitating on the small details once you're getting into writing an email, creating a report, or even working at the college level kind of essays and things. What are some of those essential things on the grammar? So this is a really good book. I'll put links to this as well. And in addition to the dictionary, there are books about kind of how to build your vocabulary. Even native speakers, again, might have a limited vocabulary range. They know how to speak and listen and read and write, but maybe they realize, okay, I would like to expand my vocabulary. This is something I would like to continue working on. So there are books that are dedicated to native speakers who want to expand their vocabulary. It isn't just you're a native speaker, boom, you have a very large vocabulary range. It is something to pursue and develop as a habit for like continual learning. So another way to work on developing your vocabulary range is having something like a thesaurus. And the thesaurus, in addition to the dictionary, these have words that have a similar meaning, a similar usage. And if you feel like you're repeating words over and over, a thesaurus might be one way to find an alternative. So your vocabulary, if you end up repeating yourself, that can lower a little bit, especially we can see this also in the delivery aspect of the speaking, where there is a transcription from the speech rater algorithm that is doing a whole transcription of what you said in your recording. And if you keep repeating those same words, that might show more limited range of vocabulary. So something like a thesaurus can help. I do sometimes mention a little word of caution with the thesaurus, though. If you just throw in a bunch of fancy words just for the sake of it, we might realize that you don't quite understand the usage of some of those words. And there might be some differences on when to use one word or another. There's a famous episode of the Friends television series, and there's a character called Joey, who mainly has a high school level of English. He didn't go to the university. He doesn't have an academic vocabulary range, and he wants to write a letter. And another character named Ross, who is a college professor, has a much more wider range of vocabulary. He tells Joey to use the thesaurus on the letter that he's writing. And unfortunately, he abuses that piece of advice, and he uses the thesaurus on every single word in the letter that he's writing. And later on, when people read it, they have no idea what he's saying because he's just obscured the meaning of what he was trying to say. So I'll put a link to that episode just to show, and that why that is related to the TOEFL is because some students have gotten some advice that says, like put a thesaurus on every single word that you're saying to make it look fancy or make it sound sophisticated, but that can just complicate things, and you want to be able to speak naturally, speak comfortably, and not draw unnecessary attention to vocabulary words that we don't realize that you're using correctly. The meaning of your message needs to be clear, and you want to feel comfortable using these vocabulary words. So if you have a list of 30, 50, 100 academic words that you've just learned a week before, but you're not feeling comfortable using them correctly, I would say like be a little cautious on using those ones. Still, as a general principle, try to expand your vocabulary and grow it organically, little by little, that you're curious to read and to listen and look at academic texts and broaden your vocabulary on different topics. But just cramming in a couple academic words just for the sake of it is not the best approach. You do generally want to expand your vocabulary, but not just throw in these academic words to try to impress somebody. But if you do want to have some of these tools, these books, they are out there, ways to expand your vocabulary, ways to look at, let's say, for example, Latin and Greek roots. That's one way to expand your vocabulary. And we can see that in the TOEFL and the reading, listening, speaking, writing sections, that having familiarity with those words and the roots and the prefixes and suffixes, that can help expand your vocabulary and also help you with deducing the meaning of words that you might not already know. Okay, so these books and guides exist. I'll put links to them as a way to have like reference books at your disposal when you're working on your grammar and your vocabulary. You don't have to do this alone, and I certainly wouldn't recommend just translating everything from your native language into English. Okay, so let's get into more of specifically what are we going to talk about here. So we looked at the speaking rubrics. We understand we need to have good grammar. We need to have a good range of vocabulary. We need to work on our sentence structures and our sentence variety. When I listen to a lot of recordings from students, and then we look at the transcription, and I point out that there's some little weaknesses in their grammar, they almost always go, oh, I know that rule. I've studied that rule. I've studied it over and over. But when it comes time to speaking under pressure with a 45-second, 60-second timer, those little mistakes come up, and they start to be kind of things that you get penalized for. So it's not enough to just say, I know the grammar, but I need to be able to use it correctly on autopilot. And what that means is you need to drill and practice a lot of things on the grammar, okay? It's not enough to just say, I know it. You need to show that you know it and you're using it correctly, because nobody is able to have a conversation with you and say, like, do you really know the grammar? The only way that they know is by you speaking with correct grammar, correct usage, the consistent usage of the tenses. So these are things that will be revealed when you're speaking under pressure. But just to say, oh, I know it, but then you make a mistake, it's unfortunately, you tolerate a little bit of some of these mistakes, but it would not be a good recommendation to have language use be the thing that lowers your score. Okay. So in order to get to the advanced grammar, we really want to eliminate these lower level mistakes and things like the letter S or ED. Those are things that I will get to. And also in terms of your sentence variety, if you are trying to use a very complex sentence structure, but you have issues with the auxiliary verbs like have and has, or the verb to be, was and were, that kind of gives the impression of an Olympic sprinter who accidentally trips and falls, maybe because they didn't tie their shoes correctly. So not only would that be kind of embarrassing, but to have all that training and then make a small mistake be the thing that brings you down, it's very frustrating. Okay. So I'm not expecting you to become grammar experts, but there are some basic concepts. And I do have a grammar review that goes into a little bit more detail, but the 4 essential details that I consider very important for the grammar are nouns, adjectives, verbs, and adverbs. And we're going to go into that right now. Okay, so nouns, these are a person, a place, a thing, a concept. These are often accompanied by articles like a, an. The a and an, that depends on the pronunciation of the word. If it has a vowel or a silent H, or in the case of the letter U, if it's like an uncle or a university, I would recommend checking some of those rules for the articles. There's also what's called a zero article, where if we say like cats chase mice, neither of those 2 words has an article because we're making a generalization. Cats in general, not specific cats. So articles go with nouns. We also have demonstrative adjectives, things like this, that, these, and those. I do hear lots of mistakes with this, that, these, and those. This and that are singular. These and those are plural. And I do hear students make some pronunciation mistakes between this and these. So not only can grammar get confused with pronunciation, back and forth pronunciation can also reflect your grammar usage. So most adjectives are invariable and do not change to adapt to the noun in English. But the example of this, that, these, and those are 4 words that do adapt. So it's really important to feel comfortable using this, that, these, and those. Possessive adjectives, these are like my, your, his, her, its, our, their. And usually these possessive adjectives can replace the word the. So we don't say like my book, but we say my book or a book or the book. And often we see prepositions with nouns. These prepositions show the relationship of location or time or position. So things like in the classroom, at the office, on the table, for me, with her. So recognizing prepositions that go with nouns. This will also be important when we get to delivery and we are pronouncing like prepositional phrases as one group. So your delivery and your language use will also go together. Descriptive adjectives, things like beautiful, big, short, old, red, Italian plastic writing. There, I will go into detail a little bit further below. And this order, there is an order called this Royal Order of Adjectives. And this is generally the way that we are putting these adjectives in order in a natural way. I mean, intuitively, the way English speakers are putting the syntax, the word order of those words. And other things that go with the nouns, numbers as well. It's like two books, 1 book. Nouns can be either singular or plural. In English, to make a plural, we generally add the letter S. There might be some spelling differences with ES and IES. And the pronunciation of the S can be S, Z, or is. We'll get to those in detail a little bit further down. So pronunciation and spelling go together once again. There are irregular plurals, things like man, men, woman, women, child, children, fish, fish, sheep, sheep. We want to be careful with those ones, or person and people. We don't want those little irregulars to create a grammar mistake when we're speaking. We want to be able to have those words under control so that we don't draw attention to those. Nouns can be either countable or uncountable. This means that there could be some differences from one language to another. but a word like car or student can exist in singular or plural: car, cars, student, students. There are words that are uncountable, things like information, coffee, water, advice, furniture. I know that information, advice, and furniture can be plural in some languages like Spanish. So be careful checking those words before you use them, and don't just assume that it would be the same in your language if countable and uncountable exist. We don't continue to say the same word over and over again with the nouns. We usually want to replace them with different pronouns. Pronouns replace nouns. These are subject pronouns like I, you, he, she, it, we, they. Or if they come after a verb, like I see you, I see him, I see her, I see us, I see them. You want to be comfortable recognizing the difference between a subject pronoun and an object pronoun, because this can reflect your knowledge of grammar and how well you're using it correctly. These are two big concepts with nouns. Before the verbs, usually it's the subject pronoun. After the verbs, it's usually the object pronoun. And in addition to object pronoun, they can also be indirect object pronouns as well if we add the word to. For example, like I give a book to you. The to you, what that refers to is the person who kind of receives something, or whose benefit that is. Like, so recognizing subject pronouns, object pronouns, either direct objects or indirect object pronouns, we want to be comfortable using those ones and replacing them correctly, because you'll be given information, for example, the campus announcement, the lectures, question 3 and 4, and you want to feel comfortable being able to switch between the professor and he, or the professor and she, or the students, they, or the professor talks about the students, the professor talks about them. So using a preposition with a pronoun, this will be part of an object pronoun. You don't want to be tripped up with those little kinds of mistakes with subject and object pronouns. Also, cohesion and coherence from one sentence to the next is a weakness that I hear a lot of students make, where the professor talks about the students in plural, and then the next sentence is like she, and we're like, who's the she? Is that the professor? Is that the students? Or is it they? So if we're not using the consistency from one sentence to the next, we can get a little confused, and that's where that kind of your message being obscured. It could come down to a pronoun if you're not being consistent with double checking. Did I just say something in singular? Did I say it in plural? That it was the object in this sentence, now it's the subject in the next sentence. We want to feel comfortable being able to switch between those pronouns, and the cohesion of being consistent with, was that singular, singular, plural, plural. That's the big weakness. It's a small detail, but it ends up being a big weakness if we don't control it. Okay. We can also replace the possessive adjectives with possessive pronouns. So if I say this is my book, I say it's mine. Whose book is it? It's mine. Or oh, it's yours. Usually those words have the letter S on them. Yours, his, hers, ours, theirs, except for the mine. And yeah, be careful using those, because there can be a difference between your versus yours, or her versus hers. So check the usage of the possessive adjectives and possessive pronouns as well. Demonstrative adjectives can also be replaced by demonstrative pronouns. Sometimes we hear it not just of this or that, but also maybe this one, that one, if there's a difference between like two nouns that we're referring to. So these are all the things that are related to nouns. Double check the usage also in your native language, and see some comparisons. I do see languages, for example, Russian, where there aren't these articles like and the. So there are students, Russian-speaking students, who struggle using the articles correctly in English, and we have to go through a lot of article usage details. And it may sound like something simple, but it can reveal a weaker level of grammar in English if these are tiny mistakes that are frequent. And if we don't correct them early enough, there's a possibility of what's called like a fossilized mistake, where it just continues for a long time, and despite trying to fix it, it will come up in a stressful situation like speaking on the TOEFL. So as you can see here, there might be small things, but they can be the things that lower your score. And we want to eliminate as many of these like small details, small mistakes that can get in the way of our answer. So just pausing here so far, are some of these concepts familiar? Is this helping you so far, bringing all this to your attention? Let me see your reaction in the comments here. Okay, yeah, it's making sense. Good, good. All right. So let me check here. Moving on. So we have adjectives that are used to describe the nouns. So that's their primary function. We don't use adjectives to describe verbs. That's a different word, but adjectives are the details that allow us to know like which noun are we talking about, or describe that noun. What does it look like? And as this table here, we can see what I mentioned, this royal order of adjectives. So we can start with a determiner. That could be the article like a or the, or a possessive adjective. We can make an observation if something is beautiful or expensive. Then we get into some physical properties, the size, the shape, the age, the color. These are, big, small, short, long, old, young, maybe the color, red, green. Then we get into these details like where is it from? Maybe a country, a nationality, it's Italian, it's English. What is it made of? The material, plastic, metal, wood, paper. And then how is it being used? Is it like a writing book, basketball, shoes? So then we finally get to the noun. But all of these other words, except for the like this, that, these, those, the other words, observation, size, shape, age, color, origin, material, qualifier, those words remain singular in English. And also in terms of syntax or word order, these adjectives go in front of the noun in English. There are some languages like Spanish or French that can put adjectives after the nouns. In English, they go before. Okay. So if you need some more practice with this kind of concept of royal order, you can look search this online and see more examples of this structure. But this is the intuitive way that we're combining them. I don't intend to say that we would use all of these in one sentence. That might be a bit too much, but at least in this order is what we would expect to see. I might say up to maybe about like 3 or 4 of them, but not all of them. But if you want to put those adjectives in that order, that would be the appropriate syntax. Okay. Moving on to verbs. Verbs, they can be categorized between auxiliary verbs, things like be, do, have, will. There's also modal verbs like can, could, must, may, might. That's another set of verbs to study on their own and their usage. There are the conjugations. That means that we change the verb to adapt to the person, the subject. And also the timing, is this present or past or future? and those allow us to create 12 different tenses in English. There is present simple, past simple, future simple, present continuous, past continuous, future continuous, present perfect, past perfect, future perfect, present perfect continuous, past perfect continuous, and future perfect continuous. I have seen that some students struggle with those, the tenses, the conjugations. So I did some programming online, and let me show you this tool that I programmed to help students. So this is all of the 12 tenses. And if I leave this just at the letter S for subject, we have all the possible structures and all the possible conjugations that we might need for the auxiliary verbs, like do and does in present, did in past, will in the future, in the continuous, in the present, am, are, and is, in the past, was and were, in the future, will, in perfect continuous, have and has, in past, had, in the future, will have, in perfect, have and has, and past had, and future will have. Between perfect and perfect continuous, we also have the past participle for the verb to be, been, on there. And if we do switch this to a specific subject, the table adapts, and we see the specific auxiliaries we need for the subject I, for example. So for I, we have do, did, will, am, was, have, and had. If we switch this to like she, then we get the letter S on several of these auxiliaries: does, is, has. And the colors that we have here are these verb forms. So most verbs, as I'll explain a little bit further in the document, is that we can see between 3 and 6 forms for these verbs, but primarily at least these 5. So we have a simple form, like an infinitive form, like arise. We have a present simple affirmative, he, she, and it, where we add the letter S. We have a continuous form, or it's also called a gerund, that adds the ing ending. We have a past simple affirmative form. This table has a lot of irregular verbs in there, but for regular verbs, it would add the ed ending. And then we have a past participle, which is used in the perfect construction. The past participle is also used in passive voice. I'll talk about that a little bit later. But as you move down this table, it will adapt, and it's also color coded, so you can see these different forms and where you need to use them. And so primarily, we see that the columns, like all of the perfect, all of them have that red color past participle. The perfect, continuous, and continuous, all of them have blue that have that ing ending on the action verb. And however, on the simple column, the green color, that simple form, primarily dominates in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 out of those 9 cells. But in the case of like he, she, it, we have to be careful with that present simple affirmative form where we're adding an S. We're not adding that S when it's a question or a negative. When it's I, you, he, when it's I, you, we, and they, then we go back and see primarily that green simple form, except for that past simple affirmative. So if you can get this like big picture view of the tenses, which is what I wanted to achieve with this tool, this is a way to kind of visualize how the verb forms are structured, that which one do you need to use. And I've studied 6 languages. I mean, I can speak 6 languages. I've studied at more than 6, but for Spanish, French, German, Italian, Russian. And I have had these conjugation books that have all of these tenses, and I have to learn all these patterns in all these other languages. And relatively speaking, English here with like 5 forms primarily, it's very simplistic compared to some other languages where you have to learn different groups of verbs. And like in Spanish, the AR verbs, ER verbs, IR verbs. In French, ER verbs, IR verbs, RE verbs. In Russian, I don't know, perfective, imperfective verbs. There's lots of different nuances in different languages. In English, I wanted to make this a visual way. And in terms of the auxiliaries, I put together this Venn diagram to see which auxiliary verbs are being shared between the different subjects. So for example, you, we, and they have this RE ending, are and were. I and he, she, it have in common the was for the past. And I, you, we, and they have do and have in common in the present for present simple and also the perfect tense. All of the subjects have in common did, had, and will. And the he, she, it present forms have that letter S, does, is, has. So this is another way to visualize the different auxiliary verbs, because I do hear a lot of students struggle with these when having to review the grammar and be able to speak correctly under pressure. So there's also a summary of those little observations that I just mentioned, also based from the subject or based on the tense. And lastly, that simple form, that present simple, past simple, we do have to be careful with present simple affirmative and past simple affirmative, which are usually the first two tenses that we usually teach students. And if you want further practice with this, I also programmed this sentence generator. So this provides a couple prompts on here, and then it's testing you to see if you can create a sentence or create the conjugation for that structure. So for example, they, listen, future simple, negative. If we're stuck, the whole complete structure would be here, subject, will, not, and then we need this simple form of the verb, like they will not listen, and I can check that. And yeah, there's correct. Is that my only option? Actually, I could do this in 3 different ways. So I could put will not. I could replace the will with they'll, the apostrophe S. Let me just check here. And I can check that. Yeah, that's also correct. Or I could replace will and not with won't. And that's another possibility. So this is a way to drill these tenses and the structures. And usually when we're speaking, we're using a lot of those contracted forms with the not or the kind of apostrophe S or apostrophe LL or apostrophe VE. So it's this tool allows you to kind of check those possibilities when structuring these tenses, and you can adapt this. It says random right here, but you can adapt them on there. So those are some tools that I've created. Another one I mentioned, these pronouns. This is another tool to check the usage. So things like a subject pronoun before the verb, an object pronoun after the verb, being aware of some contractions, because students can confuse things like your and your or yours. And so here is a small little drilling tool that gets you to use color again to fill in these little sentences that are just very short examples, but they're constantly drilling you to say something like, she sees a picture of, now I need the object form of I, me, then that object can become a subject in the next sentence with the verb to be and a contraction, I'm, in front of now the possessive, my house. And then vice versa, we switch it around. I see a picture of her, the object form of she, and the contraction she's. And then now this possessive pronoun in front of hers. Yeah, so these are these pronouns and adjectives and contractions with the verb to be that I highly recommend like drilling this over and over again. So this is not an issue with the grammar. And okay, and I can check all that and it's yes, correct, good job. And then I can click refresh and now it switches I and he, or refresh he and they, I and she again, she and we and she. So it just keeps updating and changing it and drilling you. And this is like me asking you constantly to drill these pronouns on there. Okay. So those are some things that are really important for these like auxiliaries and the tenses, and making sure that recognizing also the verb forms, these simple affirmative he, she, it with an S, the gerund or the ing form, the passible formative form if it's regular with ed, or if it's irregular, there's lots of groups of irregular forms, and the past participle. So definitely check out those tools, and recognizing that these verbs could have between 3 to up to 5 or 6. But for example, like in the most limited form, words that end with the letter T, like put or cut or hit, they basically have 3 forms. So cut, cuts, cutting, cut, cut. These 2 forms, the past simple and the past participle, are basically the same as the simple form. There may be examples like make, where the past simple affirmative and the past participle are the same. That also is what happens with regular verbs that have the ed ending. So if I had like play, plays, played, 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 that past simple affirmative and past participle are the same on there. So make sure that these details like auxiliary verbs, the tenses, the verb forms are not an issue that slows you down or creates mistakes when you're speaking. And there are lots of tools out there, like the ones I programmed here, or books, grammar books, that you can use to test them and also compare the usage between when do I use present simple, when do I use present continuous. I hear lots of students make some small mistakes with those ones. I'm not going to go specifically into those details about the tense difference in tense usage, but we do want to feel comfortable switching between those tenses, and specifically these grammar books like the English Grammar in Use would be a good place to look for these usage differences. But at least recognizing how to construct the sentence, how to construct the tense, that's a very important part of being able to speak correctly and automatically without hesitating while speaking. The verbs, another detail that is really important to recognize here is that verbs can be transitive or intransitive, meaning that a transitive verb has an object. So like I read a book, I eat a sandwich, I watch TV, the food, sandwich, TV, book, those direct objects are accompanying a transitive verb. Transitive meaning like this energy or the attention is going to a thing, this object. The intransitive means there's no object. And some of these verbs don't really make sense if we try to add an object. So for example, like the sun rises, rise, nobody is making the sun rise. And that's also just an observation we have on the earth. But birds fly, birds don't fly something, they fly on their own, or plants grow just the plants grow by themselves. Some verbs can be both. For example, a pilot flies an airplane. It's not the same thing if a bird flies. Or farmers grow crops. So there is some involvement that a farmer is part of that process for helping the plants grow. But out in the middle of nature, plants grow by themselves without any intervention from people. So we have both transitive and intransitive verbs. And it's important to recognize that difference, because later when we're working on something like active voice and passive voice, only the transitive verbs, the ones that have an object, can be in passive voice. We'll look at some examples further on here. And Additionally, I'm not going to go into too many details here, but there are phrasal verbs which often can be difficult for English learners to work on because they can have lots of different meanings and usages. We hear them a lot in the campus announcement conversation between two students. We can hear them in the lectures from the teachers, but most of the time, academic English can be a mix of spoken English and the academic written language. And the phrasal verbs do have a history that comes from German, and German has separable verbs. And if we go back into the history of English from about like 1,000 years ago, when William the Conqueror and brought Norman French to England, there were basically for a couple hundred years, French was the language of the aristocracy, the nobles, the clergy, the aristocrats, who could speak and read and write in like Latin, Greek, and French. And they brought a lot of that extra vocabulary from Latin, Greek, and French into English and had a lot of these extra syllables. In the common people speaking Anglo-Saxon, which was the beginnings of like Old English, which had an influence from German and northern, those northern languages, German, Dutch, Danish, and Icelandic, which has a lot of those words in their etymology that are related. A lot of those words had these separable prefixes, which would be the origins of phrasal verbs. And the phrasal verbs get their meaning from this combination of a verb and a prefix, or in this case, in English, it's after the verb, it's separated, it isn't together as it might be in German. And these phrasal verbs can either be separable, where we can say like pick something up, or they are inseparable, like come up with an idea. If these concepts are new for you, I would highly recommend looking up, phrasal verbs and these concepts of separable, inseparable phrasal verbs. The phrasal verbs can also be transitive or intransitive, meaning they have an object or don't have an object. So we have those combinations as well. If you recognize that you have some hesitations with phrasal verbs, definitely go into them. There are lots of books and exercises related to phrasal verbs, as that's something that a lot of native speakers are using when speaking. And I've also recognized raising my children and teaching them that they hear phrasal verbs from a very early age. So I remember going to a park with my kids one time and taking a book with me, a notebook, to just write down all the phrasal verbs that I was telling my son. And I do remember one example where he ran over to the swings and I told him, hold on, the phrase hold on. And at that moment, what I meant was wait, it's not your turn. You have to wait for this other child to get off the swing. Then when it was his turn, and he got on the swing, I told him again, hold on. But this time the meaning was different. I wanted him to hold to hold the two chains so that he would not fall off. So within a matter of like 2-3 minutes, I was telling my son, hold on, it's not your turn. Okay, then when the other kid gets off, he can get on, and then hold on so that he wouldn't fall off. And so those are like 5 or 6 phrasal verbs immediately in that one little context of being at the playground. And so little children are learning these verbs all the time, and a lot of them are visual or kind of immediate or literal. There are other ones that are figurative, where the meaning might not be so clear from just the 2 words put together. For example, take off for an airplane versus take off, I don't know, my glasses or a sweater. We don't quite see how those might be related to the words take and off, especially for the airplane. But in terms of it as an English speaker, learning all these phrasal verbs, these are my default verbs that I'm using very frequently when speaking. And it's not until I get to middle school or high school or university that I start to supplement and expand my vocabulary with a lot of these Latin, Greek, French roots and prefixes and suffixes. So I feel much more comfortable as an English native speaker using phrasal verbs in my daily life. And it's not until I get to that kind of middle school, high school, university level that I start incorporating more of these like 3, 4, 5 syllable words that have those Latin, Greek, French, like prefixes, roots, and suffixes. But a sign of an academic level learner is being able to use a combination of both those vocabulary words, so those bigger words and also these easier, what I consider easier as a native speaker, the phrasal verbs. But I need to be able to use kind of both of them to be able to switch registers, register being standard English and then maybe academic English, or back and forth. Maybe my speaking is too academic and somebody doesn't understand. So I also need to be able to simplify what I just said. And that is this between vocabulary and grammar of using these verbs and recognizing when to use one or the other. It takes practice. It's not immediately simple skill to detect, but it definitely takes a lot of practice to learn and expand your vocabulary with phrasal verbs, understand their usage, and also recognize the context when we can use a phrasal verb and when we might want to prefer an academic word that has a Latin, Greek, French origin. Okay. But that's a bigger concept if you want to go look into phrasal verbs. Okay. So what I mentioned here, active and passive voice, if we can use the transitive verbs that have a direct object, we can also put them in passive voice. So the active voice is we're focusing on who is doing something, and we have our object what or whom. Now, whom is it is a grammatical word that's showing the word for like a person as an object. However, we do hear a lot in spoken English the word who instead of whom. So this is a detail of grammar that's starting to kind of erode a little bit as the language continues to evolve. But in academic English, we do still need to be aware of the usage of whom, which is an object or like direct or indirect object. In who is this subject. So who wrote a book? I did. What did I write? A book. So if we can be able to, if we're able to use the active voice, we can also switch this to the focus of the book to say like, okay, the book was written by her. What was written? So we use a form of to be, and then we use the past participle written, and then we can include the agent with a word like by who? By her. Who wrote the book? She wrote the book. What was written? The book was written. But we can't do this with intransitive verbs. Those are the verbs that don't have objects. So if there's no object, we can't use the passive voice. So something like I sleep, there's no object with sleep. So to say I am slept doesn't make any sense. Or like the sun is risen. You might find that in some archaic texts, but in modern English, we don't say the sun is risen, like the sun rose, because is risen makes it sound like somebody else pushed the sun up or something like that. Or birds are flown, it makes it sound like somebody is kind of taking a bird and throwing it, which is not the case. So this is between active and passive. This is something that comes up with the grammar in terms of recognizing is that verb transitive or intransitive? What is the focus of that sentence? Now, getting into this detail, subject and verb agreement, this is a weakness that comes up very frequently when students are speaking quickly, especially when there's a letter S that is missing. For example, it's correct to say the student thinks, the student speaks. However, it becomes a problem when we're missing the letter S to say like the student think. So I'm, as a listener, might be wondering, did they forget to pronounce the S? So it's just a delivery problem in terms of pronunciation, or did they not put the S because they didn't remember that present simple affirmative, we need an S in English. And in a language like Spanish or French, the letter S might be used for the informal you, or like a tu form. So it might not be associated with he, she. So that's something to train. Some languages use the letter S maybe in a different place in their conjugations. But in English, we do need that letter S if that subject is singular in the present tense. And there might be cases where we've got too many S's, like the students thinks. Then we have another problem. There's too many. There's one too many. Where do we remove it? Is it student that should be singular, and then we keep the S on thinks, or is it students is plural, and we should get rid of the S for students think? So I kind of think of this S kind of like a light switch, either on and off. It's either the S is on the subject or it's on the verb, or vice versa in present simple affirmative. So if you have this issue of this kind of letter S, double check this, because this can be pronunciation and it can also be grammar at the same time. And subject verb agreement also goes into things like in the past tense, when students are hesitating between was and were, and also with the word like person or people. People is plural in English, so we need to say people are and people were. So double check that if you recognize that kind of a weakness. And so these little things of the letter S, the sound S, can come up and affect the grammar and pronunciation. We'll get into the pronunciation a bit later, but those are some details that are coming up with the subject verb. Okay. Now, this fourth concept that I think is very important in terms of basic grammar, the nouns, verbs, adjectives, and here adverbs. Adverbs have three functions. They modify verbs, which is usually an adverb of manner. How did somebody do that? Or how do you sing? I sing well. Adverbs can also modify in terms of a place or time. So I sing at home, that's an adverb of place. When I sing on Mondays, that can be a time, or how often, that can be an adverb of frequency. So I always, never, sometimes do this. And the other adverbs that can modify adjectives and adverbs, these are called adverbs of degree. So if I sing, if the tree is tall, how tall? So I want to measure this. Is it kind of a short tree, or is it a tall tree, or very tall tree? So very and quite, these show like this degree of how much for measuring this adjective. So very tall, or that car is very fast, or this music is very loud. If I want to describe the verb, like I sing well, okay, again, how well? Quite well, very well, surprisingly well. Those are adverbs of degree that are modifying another adverb. So the well is modifying the verb, and very is modifying well. Make sure you can recognize this usage for the ending. Like usually we see an ly on some of these adverbs of manner, but we have verbs like very, adverbs like very, we have well. We want to feel comfortable using those. And sometimes we can hear native speakers make some mistakes, like come quick as opposed to come quickly. So even native speakers need to double check the usage on adverbs and the spelling, and because we can make some mistakes based on our usage in fast spoken English. Okay, so once you have the nouns, adjectives, verbs, adverbs, those concepts, those 4 concepts, we also need to feel comfortable combining them. So for example, nouns and adjectives, verbs and adverbs, and also verbs with adverbs with adjectives. Okay, so looking in terms of expanding your vocabulary, I've made reference to these kind of Latin, Greek, French, like roots and suffixes and prefixes. That's one way to expand your vocabulary in terms of word families, that you can find a root, and then also looking at these different endings that can change the usage of this word. So you can take a root and turn that root into a noun, or turn it into a verb, turn it into an adjective, turn it into an adverb. And that ability to learn those words and then use them in your sentences with some variety and some flexibility, this does improve your usage of the language. So if you're always doing the same thing all the time, this can show a limited range of vocabulary. And I'm usually asking students, is that the only way you can say that? Is there another way you can say that? To just turn this into a habit of looking for multiple ways to express the same idea, because you need that flexibility with your speaking and also your writing. So for example, a word family related to ease, which has an influence from the French aise or aise. So to be at ease is taking the this noun form ease, and at ease. We have the adjective form, which a lot of students recognize, easy. There's the adverb easily. I would also recommend, as you're learning adjectives, definitely learn the comparative and superlative forms of the adjectives. Comparative is when you're comparing two things, like English is easier than, I don't know, Japanese or Russian or Arabic or Chinese. And of all the languages, I don't know, Esperanto is the easiest. So recognizing that we have that change of spelling from Y to IER or Y to IEST. So I'll make sure to add comparatives and superlatives to the list, because we do need those, especially in, for example, question number 1 or question number 2, to justify a preference or justify an opinion, especially in the campus announcement, where like this will be more difficult, this will not be easier if the administration makes this decision. So we want to recognize these different forms of these words, things like adapt, adaption, the TION ending, to adapt as the verb. We have adjectives like adaptable. We can turn adaptable into an adverb like adaptably. We have words like comfort, comfortable, comfortably, analyze, analysis, the person who does it, an analyst, the action, analyze, analytical, analytically, words like sit and seat and seating and sitting, and the passive, this ed ending can be used as an adjective as well, and words like prefer, preference, preferable, preferably, perform, performance, performer, performed. So recognizing those different forms and turning this into a habit of saying, like, if I know the noun, is there an adjective? If I know the noun, is there a verb? Can I turn those words in those different structures? Okay. So we will see examples in the reading section that kind of take a combination like an adjective and a noun, or a verb and adverb, or an adjective and adverb, and being able to switch those around and recognize that they mean the same thing in there. So those, yeah, adverbs, verbs, adverbs, adjectives, and adjectives, nouns. And the more diverse your vocabulary and the more flexibility you have, the higher your level of usage for the language. So here are some examples that we could put for those words that I've just put for the word families. We could say like easy adaption, easily adapted, easily adaptable, comfortable seats, comfortably seated, analytical study, analytically studied. So here are some example sentences that kind of show these little combinations. So there are comfortable seats for passengers on the train. The various positions of the seats allow for easy comfort. The train designers performed an analytical study of how passengers prefer to sit. And these could be rephrased. Passengers are comfortably seated. There's an adverb and adjective. The train seats can be easily adapted, depending on how comfortably, that's the adverb, wish to sit, the verb. The train seats are easily adaptable. So we can say easily adapted or easily adaptable. And to each passenger's preference and level of comfort, there's the noun, as opposed to comfortably. And the train passengers' preferences were analytically studied to adapt the seat. So we have all these little variations that we can put in there. This is just something I made up, but we definitely see this also in the reading section. And if we detect these kinds of things in the reading section, or we also detect them in the professor's lectures and the listening section, what the ETS is showing us, the people who make the TOEFL exam, is that this is a feature of English that they want to promote, and they're also encouraging you to use. So take note of these kinds of little switches that happen in the texts in the reading section, and also when they're rephrased in the questions that you read. So this becomes a habit of noticing it and then using it actively. If you don't notice it, then me mentioning this, you would probably ignore that. But now that I've mentioned it to you, you can start noticing this in the reading section, the text and the questions, and that will now turn on something on your radar that you're noticing that these concepts exist. The next thing is not let this just be passive information for you, that you're aware of it, but you don't actually use it. And when you get to the speaking section, the writing section of the test, you want to use this. Because if all you do is just notice it, but you don't use it, then you're limited in terms of what you're able to say. And so a lot of the things that I end up teaching for grammar and vocabulary is not only be aware of these things, but you also need to push yourself to use them. The more you use them, and the more you do that intentionally, the more likely you're going to do this automatically, like on autopilot mode, when you're speaking and writing. If I have to tell you to do this, then that means that it's not automated yet, that you have to be encouraged to do it. It's like if I tell my children, did you brush your teeth? Did you brush your teeth? So if I have to remind them, this means that that is not yet an automated habit or automatic reflex. So if you're dependent on being encouraged or reminded to do something, that's not yet automatic. These little habits on what to do with your vocabulary and making this a habit of like switching the adjectives and nouns. Can you turn that into a verb and an adverb? Can you turn that into an adverb and an adjective? This needs to become an automatic reflex with your speaking and writing to show a higher level language use. So as a native speaker, I don't have to be told to speak this way. This has now become a habit, an automatic reflex for me, and it's also something I want to encourage students to do as well with their speaking and writing. If I have to push students to do it, it's not yet an automatic reflex. Okay. In terms of expanding your vocabulary specifically for academic English, there are these tools. For example, here, this academic word list. This has these word families, and you can see these parts of speech. They don't list the parts of speech there, but we know that as you go through and look at this list, we see that this is an adjective, this is an adverb, this is a noun, this is a person. And be comfortable being able to like mix and match these combinations of words. Not only look at the list, there are a couple pages on here, like 20 pages of these academic words, but be not only familiar with them, but be curious to kind of combine them and make up your own little sentences. Even if those sentences don't really feel like they mean something, just turn that into a habit of making these little combinations. Okay. And there's also looking up these tools for collocations. These are words that go together. So if I look up a word like analysis, what are some common words that go with that? Like comprehensive analysis, detailed analysis, a thorough analysis, a theoretical analysis. And then we can see verb and analysis. So carry out an analysis, perform an analysis. So if you can combine an idea of like a noun, an adjective, a verb, those are the essentials of an idea. And then you can put them into the different tenses and complete your sentence. Okay. But this kind of tool is basically what makes me a native speaker, is recognizing what are those adjectives that go with nouns, or if I look up an adjective like easy, what are some common things that are easy? So we have verbs that like look easy, sound easy, or we have these adverbs that also relate to easy, extremely easy, very easy, quite easy. And so you can take nouns and verbs and adjectives and find words that are very commonly used together, because some students are translating from their native language, and that might sound correct in your native language, but it might sound awkward in English. Another tool that I often recommend looking at, based on this kind of collocations and words that kind of go together and seeing, does that sound natural? There's this Ngram viewer. I'll make sure to add this to the to the list of tools. So if I take something like let's say big house, large house, big home, large home, and like what's the general usage of those words between house and home, or big and large? And what this tool shows us is over about 200 years of books that have been digitalized and added to this corpus of research. We can see that based on these colors here, that for a long time, people had said large house in the 1850s and up until the 1920s. And somewhere around the 1930s, there was this preference that switched between big house, and then it kind of combined again in the 60s. And then suddenly, since the 1960s, people have been using the phrase big house more in literature than large house. And we can see down at the bottom that people don't usually talk about the words large home or big home. It's more frequent to use this phrase big house. And that's not something you would immediately detect just by using Google Translate or looking in a dictionary. This is another tool that kind of takes about 200 years of history, and we can see that the language evolves and changes over time. And so just because something exists, does that necessarily mean that that's what we consider like the current natural way or the common way of saying something? So take advantage of this kind of a tool, this Ngram viewer. You can do these combinations of these collocations, adjectives and nouns, or verbs and adverbs, or adjectives and adverbs, and check to see, are these things that you plan to say with your academic essays or your academic speaking, are these reflecting the norms of kind of this modern usage of the language? And another way to check that as well is if you did take one of these phrases to say big house, if you're really curious on this in terms of pronunciation as well, you can go into a tool called Youglish. And this is not only it finds YouTube videos, it's not based on the title of the YouTube video, it's based on the transcriptions of the videos. So you can hear a phrase being used. So if I hear the phrase big house, there's about like 1,000 videos, about almost 2,000 videos that have this phrase. And so it will find a video where somebody is using that phrase. And so, which was basically a load of bloggers in this really big house in Yorkshire. So we can hear the pronunciation of the phrase big house, but we can also see its usage in a sentence. So for example, as I mentioned, there might be a preposition. We might have a demonstrative adjective in this. We have an adverb really. We have the adjective big. We have a house. And that house is located in another kind of part of England in Yorkshire. So this is giving you examples of sentences, and I'm assuming that this person is speaking with correct English. And you can go through and look at another example.
Way out here.
And it's a big house. So again, the contraction, it's the article a big house. So you can go and find these call locations, double check the usage, that this is frequent in modern English, and then you can go find examples to listen to it and listen to the sentences that are being spoken, and probably hopefully that these are sentences are correct, that you can learn from and copy and imitate for your speaking. Okay. So yeah. So make vocabulary variety a game for yourself. As I said, if I have to push you or encourage you to do it, it's not yet automated. And as a proficient speaker, as a native speaker, I'm doing this automatically. I'm not being told to do this. I've just learned through elementary school, middle school, high school, university, that a good writer, a good speaker uses this variety, and to be like told again and again. It's like telling my children, did you brush your teeth? Did you brush your teeth? So at some point as an adult, I don't need somebody telling me, did you brush your teeth every morning? I do that as a good habit for hygiene or something. So as a good habit of speaking, I want to use variety with my vocabulary and these little structures. Okay. And as I mentioned, the reading section, you can find those examples, and in the transcriptions for the listening section as well. And I compile your own lists and double check those lists with those tools like the Ngram or the Youglish forms. Okay. But yeah, if you don't make this variety a priority now, it's probably a bit too late once you get to the day of the exam. These need to be kind of automated as a reflex or as just a good habit. So, okay. Getting into some overlap here of the pronunciation, and I've talked about the grammar, and I will go through this briefly so I can get to the sentence variety aspect. But basically, the letter S at the end of like present simple, he, she, it, affirmative, has three different pronunciations. So if you take your hands and put them on your throat and you pronounce the sounds, you'll notice that your throat is not vibrating. I'll do it again. So those consonants, those ones are called unvoiced. And this idea of voicing is that the throat is vibrating. Now, the ones down here, if I put my hand back on my throat and I do z, g, b, d, the, l, m, n, the whole time on all of those consonants, my voice, my throat, the vocal cords is vibrating. And that's a big distinction that we need to make with our pronunciation. And this can also affect between pronunciation and grammar and understanding. And we'll take a look briefly at some of these potential problems. But I have a more specific Google Doc here that's related to the present tense pronunciation in these groups. And I also have a YouTube video that's kind of going through this. I'll link to this as well, so you can hear them and you can practice them and listen to them. It's going through that. But this group here has s. So you want to practice these combinations of So these are changing words like stuff, stuffs, and that's to put something inside of it, not like I'm not using the plural for the noun. Work, works, stop, stops, create, creates, froth, froths. That's like when you add the milk at the Starbucks or something, and it has all those little bubbles. Okay. So these ones I mentioned have the vocal cords vibrating, and what we add after that is the letter Z, for the sound Z. Now, students from other languages may struggle with this sound Z. Like Spanish speakers don't usually often use the sound Z. However, it does exist in words like desde or mismo. And I do have some students from other languages that also struggle with it Z. Especially because they want to pronounce the E in between these. But we really just want to get the sound here like bzz, gzz, bzz, bzz, lz, mz, nz, mz, vzz. And then a vowel sound like play, plays. We'll get into some potential problems with if we mispronounce z as s. We'll see things like plays and place in a second. And there is this group called sibilants where we add the spelling, we add es, but what it does is it adds an extra syllable, is. So we have sizz, shiz, chiz, zzz, jizz, jizz. So on here, we've got produce and then produces. Wash, one syllable. Washes, two syllables. Watch, one syllable. Watches, two syllables. Use, uses. Massage, massages. Purge, purges. I would recommend that you go through and practice those ones. I do have a short little video on Instagram to review those ones, but yeah, I'll get that there in a second. The languages like German and Russian, they have a concept where, as I mentioned here, if you have the vocal cord vibration and you don't do this, you kind of change the sound. So for example, in Russian, there's the word for city, город. Like in the spelling, it's a D, but actually in the pronunciation, and it's город. So that concept is called a D-voiced, which was a voiced consonant, but this becomes D-voicing. It in the spelling, it looks like it's a D, but in the pronunciation and actual use, it becomes a T. And so I tell students who speak Russian, be careful, don't do that when you speak English, because that's a feature of Russian, not English. And similarly, this also happens in German if we have like Guten Tag or Guten Tag. So this G at the end of Tag for day, good day, hello, the G becomes a K in the pronunciation. But again, we have to be careful with that because that can create some confusion with our listening comprehension, or at least somebody listening to us, if we accidentally do that and we don't realize we're doing that. So we make this distinction, for example, like s or z. So a piece, like one, like if I buy two things and each thing costs a certain amount of money, so I can buy it a piece. Appease, that's a verb to try to calm somebody down. Cease is to stop. Seize, this is like the oceans. Seize, the verb, or seize, like take something. Close, that's an adjective, like I was close to the window. I couldn't close the window. That's a Z sound with the verb. Device, like a telephone or a computer. Devise would be the verb to make something. Dice, this is usually in a game, like a board game, where you've got two dice. Dies, that's for the end of somebody's life. Excuse, that's the noun. Excuse, like excuse me, that's the verb. Face, what you can see here, and phase, that's like a stage or part of a process. False, not correct. Falls, that somebody like fell over. Gross, that could be like gross domestic product or something disgusting. Grows, like a plant. Ice, if you want to make your drink cold. Eyes, the things you use to see. Loose, like loose change, like or pants that are not tight. Or lose, you can't find your keys. Niece, that would be your sister or brother's daughter. Knees, these are part of your leg. Once, that's one time. Ones, these are like multiple of one. Pace is how fast you do something. Pays, that's related to money. Place, that's a location of something. Plays, that's like a game or an instrument. Price, how much you pay for something. Prize, what you get as a reward. Race, that could be where you're running. Raise, where you lift something. Rice, that's a food. Rise, when you like stand up or the sun rises. Scarce, not a lot of something. Scares, you're afraid. Source is where you got something, the origin. Soars, this could be like a bird flying, or soars could be if you hurt something. Spice, this is something you add to your food. Spies, these are probably people from another country that are collecting information about another country. Tense, this could be the verb tense. Tens could be multiple, 10, 20, 30, 40. Use, that's a noun, and use, that's a verb. So these are just examples where if you don't pronounce the S or the Z correctly, especially the Z, if you devoice it, it becomes an S, we're going to possibly misunderstand this word, and there could be sentences where it could be confusing. So this is a case where S and Z is very important to distinguish, to work on that. And that concept is called minimal pairs. And then these groups, I said of the S, Z, Sh, J, Ch, J, we add the is sound there. And I mentioned that on here on Instagram, there is a little video that you can go through and listen to and pronounce over and over. So these like miss, misses, missed, buzz, buzzes, buzzed, or where's on here? Yeah. So you can go through this video, it repeats on there. Okay. And also on here, I would add that the possessive S, like Chris, Chris's, Liz, Liz's, Josh, Josh's, Serge, Serge's, Rich, Rich's, George, George's. These also, the possessive S affect the pronunciation of these names. And also in the verbs, as I mentioned, and also in the plural of nouns like bus, buses, quiz, quizzes, bush, bushes, barrage, barrages, watch, watches, advantage, advantages. And the number there is referring to the number of syllables. So you see that this adds an extra syllable when we add that is sound. So make sure to go through that for pronunciation, because this relates also to your grammar. And similarly, in the past tense, we have these groups. I have a document here that will add the ones that don't use the vocal cords, the unvoiced consonants. These add the sound T. So words like triumph, triumphed, work, worked, stop, stopped, produce, produced, wash, washed, froth, frothed, watch, watched. So the E is silent, but we add a T ending. Then the ones that do have that vocal cord vibration, we add D. We don't pronounce the E. A lot of students want to pronounce the E, but we don't. Okay. So V, V, D, G, D, B, B, D, Z, Z, D, J, J, D, J, J, D, L, D, M, D, nd, erd, zd. And vowels, we add D, like played and showed and copied. So serve, served, drug, drugged, disturb, disturbed, use, used, massage, massaged, purge, purged, control, controlled, consume, consumed, obtain, obtained, prolong, prolonged, ignore, ignored, clothe, clothed, copy, copied, guarantee, guaranteed, play, played, show, showed. And finally, this last little tiny group, which ends up being an easier rule to remember, is that when we have TED and DED, there we add id, which is like the ending of did. So augment, and we add an extra syllable. Augment, augmented. Contact, contacted. Create, created. Decide, decided. Defend, defended. Offend, offended. Okay, so make sure that you can go back and like pronounce these differences, because this will distinguish between the past if you're using it correctly, and also you want to make sure that you, if we can hear these endings, because if you don't hear those endings, we might question your pronunciation and we might question your tense and your grammar usage. So you can be penalized for like both at the same time if you're not careful with these endings. Okay. And so these are also more examples where the T and the D ending, especially with the final, if you don't pronounce them clearly, not only with verbs, but there are other examples where the T and the D, we need to hear that difference. So ate, this is the past of eat. Aid, that's a person who helps. Bent, that's the past of bend. So something like this. Bet is something with money on like a game. Bed, that's where you sleep. Bit is the past of bite. Bid, this is also like at an auction where you're putting money. Blurt is to like say something quickly. Blurred is if I do something to my camera and you can't see clearly. Brought is the past of bring. Broad, that's maybe very wide, or if I travel abroad, abroad. Built is the past of build. Cite is if you're using a source, like in a text. Sight is your ability to see. Sight is a place. Side is something here, like my left side, right side. Side is if I'm tired. Faint, if I'm tired and I might pass out. Feigned is if I pretend to do something. Feet, those are the things I use to walk on. Feed, that's when I give food to like my cat or my dog. Float is if something is light and it's in the air. Flowed, like the water in a river. Hat, something I put on my head. Had, the past of have. Heart, the thing that pumps blood in my body. Hard, the opposite of soft. Height, how tall I am. Hide, if you can't find me, I'm playing hide and seek. Hit, this is to like hurt somebody. Hid, the past of hide. Hurt, if I fall and it's something that doesn't feel good. Heard, the past of hear. Late, if I'm not on time. Laid, if I put something down on a table. Let, if I allow something. Led is the past of lead, like to show somebody around a city, like a tourist guide. Lent, the past of lend. Light, this is what I need to see. Lied, the past of lie, to tell like not the truth. Lit, the past of, well, basically light, to turn on, like I lit the room with light. Lid, this is probably put something I put on top, for example, like a bottle. Mate is a friend, a classmate, roommate. Made is past of make. or made, somebody who might clean a room at a hotel. Meant, the passive mean. Mend, like fix something if I'm sewing like something like a hole in a shirt. Moat, this is like the water around a castle. Mode, this is when you cut the grass around a house. Oat, these are food that you might eat for breakfast. Ode, if you need to give somebody money back. Plate, the thing you use to eat. Played, like a game or an instrument. Port, where the boats arrive in like a coastal city, or like airport. Poured, if you put a liquid in from one container to another. Right, it's correct. Right would be some kind of a routine or some kind of a ceremony. And write, the action of writing. And ride, like ride a bicycle, ride a horse. Sat, the past of sit. Sad if you're not happy. Sent, the past of send. Set, like put something on the table. Said, the past of say. Slight, a little bit. Slide, that's something at a playground that kids can go down. Slit is maybe something cut. Slid is the past of slide. Spent, the past of spend for money. State, to say something, or like United States. Stayed is if you didn't move or you remained somewhere. Stunt could be something in a movie, like an action. Stunned, if you were surprised or something. Tight would be the opposite of loose, like your jeans. Tied, if you make a knot with something. So these are examples of t and d, where if we don't pronounce the T and the D, the final T and D correctly, we might understand something different. And as you can see, some cases we do have D and T a lot of times in those tenses for present, past in some groups. Okay, and a couple more here. Yeah, thought, thawed, wait, weighed, writ, rid, wrote, rode. And I want to get into these sentence types. So now this is the last part that we'll get here today. That builds on your understanding of the tenses of all the 12 tenses, but we'll look at most of these in like present or past simple. So there are 4 types of sentences. And even though this is simple, we're going to see that there can be some details that you can add into a simple sentence to make it interesting, but essentially the structure is simple. So if we have those intransitive verbs, like I sleep, that's a sentence. In its most essential basic form, I sleep, there's a subject. In a verb, it's an intransitive verb, there's no object. Or I watch TV, that is also a simple sentence. There's a subject, a verb, and an object. And that's it. That's enough. So in the most basic form, we can have either an intransitive verb with a subject or a transitive verb with an object, and those 3 words basically end up being a sentence. We can make these sentences a little bit more interesting if we added some more detail, for example, with a verb like give. Then we can add an indirect object like to my friend. So I is the subject, gave, that's the past form of this transitive verb. The direct object for gave is the book, and that's the direct object. And then to my friend, that's the indirect object, who received the book. And that is a simple sentence. We can also add these details of adverbs. So how did I do something? Adverb of manner. When did I do something? Adverb of time. Where did I do it? Adverb of place. How often, or even why, with a purpose. So for example, I rarely watch TV. This includes a frequency adverb. I rarely watch TV at home. That adds an adverb of place. I gave the book to my friend on Monday. This adds the adverb of time. And why did I go to the store? I went to the store for milk. This adds an adverb of purpose or some objective or intention. So we can build up our sentences with more details. And then this gets the question of, well, what order do I put those adverbs in? And so we have to be careful with this syntax or word order. So we put the manner, place, and time in that order: manner, place, time. And for example, like I went by car. How did I go? I went by car. Where? To the store. When? On Monday. If we have a frequency adverb, like always, never, often, rarely, sometimes, then we would put this in between the subject and the verb. I never go by car to the store on Mondays. Or if it has an auxiliary verb, for example, like will, then we put this in between the auxiliary verb and the action verb. So I will never go by car to the store on Mondays. And it is possible that we can change the word order and make something more important and bring it to the front of the sentence. But when we do that, we add in writing a comma, but we pause slightly when we're speaking with a comma. So usually, comma, I go on foot to the store on Mondays. And on Mondays, I usually go on foot to the store. So depending on what we want to draw attention to, maybe it's the usually part, the frequency, or maybe it's the time on Mondays, if we're focusing on the day on Mondays. Or we have what's called like a sentence adverb, where the whole sentence is modified by this idea of like unfortunately. And then all of this together becomes the unfortunately. So unfortunately, I did not have time to go to the store yesterday. And so that unfortunate part applies to everything in that sentence, not just one thing. So there is quite a lot of variety that you can get with just what's called the simple sentence structure. But even though you have some variety with the syntax and the details you can provide in the simple sentence, it's not the only sentence structure that exists. And it doesn't mean that it's simplistic. So, and we do also be careful if you're coming from languages like Spanish or Russian, where you could move these things around in lots of different places in the sentence in your native language, but be careful of these structures that exist in English for the word order, the syntax. Just because it feels natural one way to put an adverb or where to put it in your native language doesn't necessarily mean that it's the same place in English. So be aware of these things, because this causes a lot of hesitation when people are trying to speak quickly and then they realize, wait, where do I put that? And so those little hesitations of where do I put that can slow people down, and you don't want to be wasting time trying to remember those structures. You want them to be automated so you can be speaking on autopilot and not have the language, the sentence structure be a weakness. You want to be able to kind of use this to your benefit, use it to your advantage, and not let it be a weakness. Okay. The next type of sentence is called compound. And basically, we're taking two simple sentences and we put them together with a coordinating conjunction. These words are for, and, nor, but, or, yet. So you can look this up. Some people learn them as fanboys. Again, that F-A-N-B-O-Y-S is the for, and, nor, but, or, yet. So I mainly use and, but, and so. The other ones exist, and I would encourage you to look them up online and see example sentences. But if you can use and, but, and so, I would be happy with that. So we can combine examples like I watched TV, she read a book. So if we add comma and, like I watched TV, comma and, she read a book, that would be a compound sentence. Basically two sentences, two simple sentences, a subject and a verb, subject and verb. In this case, there are two transitive verbs, watched with an object, read with a book. There's a transitive verb with an object. And we combine those, and basically what we say is that these two things happened at the same time. Okay. Then if we happen to have one subject who did two different things, like I watched TV and read a book, then we have the same subject. We don't have a change of subject. So here we don't need this comma. So be careful to recognize that I watched TV and she read a book, we have a change of subject and we're combining these two together. But we could, in this case, I watched TV and she read a book. Now, this is combining these two clauses, or essentially these two simple sentences. And it's, yeah, these two different subjects, two different actions. Okay. If we want to show some contrast, we would use but. So I watched a movie, I didn't like the movie. So if we watch something, we might expect that somebody likes it, but I want to heighten this contrast and say like, no. So I watched a movie, but I didn't like it. Okay. Now we do have the same subject, I and I, but we have two different actions that kind of oppose each other. And we can see there's an example like in the campus announcement, we could have something like the university plans to build a new stadium. But the woman in the conversation does not think the plan is a good idea. So she is opposed to this plan in the campus announcement. Okay. We can also add in this like comma so, which shows kind of a conclusion or kind of emphasizing why we do something. So I can save money, I can eat healthier food, and I prefer to eat at home instead of at restaurants. So I can save money and eat healthier food. So this is one person doing these two things with the and, there's not comma and, but here we have comma so, that's why. So I can save money and eat healthier food. So that's why I prefer to eat at home instead of at restaurants. So this is something you could use like in a question number 1 with a personal preference question. Okay. Moving on, there are complex sentences. This is where we get into dependent and independent clauses. And to connect these sentences, we have subordinating conjunctions. These are things like if, when, although, because. There are many, many more that exist. I would recommend looking them up online to see more example sentences. And then we have an independent clause, which is basically a simple sentence. So we can start with the independent clause, like I watch TV, or I watched TV, and then maybe a supporting conjunction like because I was bored. Okay. Or we could switch the sentence around and start with because I was bored, then we add a comma or a pause when speaking, and then I watched TV. A common example here with like winning the lottery and buying a house. So I will buy a house, that's an independent clause. Then we put the subordinating conjunction in the middle, if, and there's no comma. So I will buy a house if I win the lottery. And this, if I win the lottery, is the dependent clause. So notice that the if is the subordinating conjunction that's in the middle, but the combination if I win the lottery, that's the dependent clause, and there's no comma when the subordinating conjunction is in the middle. If I move this around and start the sentence with if, then there's a comma after the word lottery. So if I win the lottery, comma, I will buy a house. Okay. So the two are possible. Just be careful with the comma usage and that structure when you're speaking and writing. If you make a mistake, then that can be considered like a run-on sentence or an incomplete sentence. So this is another combination where if you get distracted or you lose your train of thought, you might end up making a grammatical mistake. Or if you interrupt your sentence, you started something, but you didn't complete it. This can also create that kind of a grammatical mistake where your language use and along with your delivery can kind of overlap and create a weakness. So you want to be careful with making these structures. Also, in terms of delivery, if we start with this dependent clause, our voice goes up and then shows that the sentence finishes. So if I win the lottery, the rising tone, I will buy a house. If I start the sentence with the independent clause, I will buy a house if I win the lottery. Let me do that again, because that's really important to catch that little difference in your speaking. This would be like a much more advanced little delivery detail with the language use. So if I win the lottery, voice goes up, pause, I will buy a house. I will buy a house if I win the lottery. One more time, won't comment. If I win the lottery, I will buy a house. I will buy a house if I win the lottery. So there's a little change on that rising tone, falling tone. This is a more kind of advanced thing to add to your delivery along with the language use. Okay. Another thing to do to add complexity to this complex sentence are these relative clauses. These add some more details about the nouns in our sentences. So I read the book, you gave me the book. Okay, which book did I read? I read the book that you gave me. Okay, I saw a man, the man had a hat. Which man did I see? I saw a man who had a hat. So also notice here, when speaking, I don't pause, because this who had a hat, this is called a defining clause, because it's helping me realize which man. This information is necessary for me to know which person I'm talking about. There are many men. That one has a hat, that one doesn't. So which man did I see? I saw a man who had a hat, or I saw the man who had a hat. Which man? But if this information is not important, this is called a non-defining clause, and we do add these pauses. So I saw a man. By the way, the man had a hat, but that detail isn't important. I saw a man, pause, who had a hat. So I saw a man who had a hat. I saw a man who had a hat. There's that little pause. Again, that's a little more advanced little detail. Okay, I saw a man. The man is my neighbor. By the way, he had a hat, but that's not important. The man who had a hat is my neighbor. Or it is important to know which person I'm talking about. The man who had a hat is my neighbor. Let me say those two again. The man who had a hat is my neighbor. The man who had a hat is my neighbor. There's a little difference there on where we pause and where a voice goes up or down. And that changes the interpretation of that sentence. So yeah, be careful with that. Okay. Or the man who is my neighbor had a hat. But the man who is my neighbor had a hat. Okay. We can also add in with whom. So this kind of like how did I speak, or with whom did I speak? So I saw a man. In this case, it's this kind of object of the sentence. I saw a man with whom I spoke in Spanish. I saw a man. The man's hat was red. Here, for this possessive, we use whose. Whose hat was red? I saw a man whose hat was red. And lastly, we have which can refer to like a whole idea. So I forgot to take my umbrella, which turned out to be a bad idea because it rained. Now, if you're not familiar with relative clauses, I would recommend going in and double checking these and looking at more examples. There's a really good website, the Purdue Online Writing Lab. They have a lot of useful exercises and explanations for academic level writing, and you can find more examples. So, and they have a search tool on here. So if I go into this online writing lab and look for this like relative clauses, yeah, there's a lot of exercises and examples that are on here, relative clauses. I highly recommend that for the writing and grammar explanations as well. Okay, and the last type of sentence that's on here, compound complex. This is where we're combining these previous two, where compound means we're adding that coordinating conjunction like and, but, so. And complex means we have a dependent and independent clause, and we have a subordinating conjunction in the middle. So, for example, I watched a movie, simple sentence. I didn't like the movie. Perhaps someone else might like the movie. Okay. Now this one is a little bit more kind of, there's a combination here where we have and, which is creating this compound. But with even though we're starting with the dependent clause and then finishing with the independent clause. So I watched a movie, and like I said before, the dependent clause, my voice goes up. So I watched a movie, and even though I didn't like it, perhaps someone else might, meaning like it. Okay. Here's like an easier example. I went to the park. I didn't stay long. Why? It started to rain. So the why, I'll answer that with because. And that creates this, because it started to rain, that is a dependent clause. But this is combining the compound. So I went to the park, but I didn't stay long because it started to rain. Listen to my voice again. I went to the park, but I didn't stay long because, so my voice comes up on the because. So I went to the park, but I didn't stay long because it started to rain. In this other one, I watched a movie, and even though I didn't like it, perhaps someone else might. So that's, again, a more advanced little thing on your voice going up, rising tone, falling tone, and where you're doing that, and also your pausing. So your grammar, language use, the sentence variety, and your pronunciation, these things go together. And these are a foundation of effective speaking on the exam. And these are things that I would not recommend ignoring if you really want to get those higher scores. So the last little detail about that variety part, because in the beginning we said that it's not just that you like have simple and complex sentences, but in using them when appropriate. And if you only use the simple sentences, then you might be showing them that you have a limited range of sentence structures. You want to be able to do a little bit of everything to show that you're skillful in multiple things, not just only one type. So, for example, if you're eating breakfast and you only have the same thing every day, that's not variety. And also at the same time, if you only use compound complex sentences, that also is not variety. So a little bit of one of this, one of that, it can be one way to show some variety. And also, if you're going to use a compound sentence and you use another compound sentence, try to use a different coordinating conjunction. So for example, in one sentence you do and, another one you do but. That would create a little bit of variety. Maybe don't put them right next to each other, but maybe put one in the beginning of your answer, another one later. And if you're going to use a complex sentence, maybe in one time you use the subordinating conjunction at the beginning of the sentence. Maybe the second time you use a different subordinating conjunction and you put it in the middle of the sentence. That would also create some variety. So different coordinating conjunctions, different subordinating conjunctions, and a little variety in your sentence word order or syntax. This can create that variety. And this last little comment here is like in the Olympics that we just saw with the gymnastics, that they're being graded on this difficulty level and how well they execute that routine. So if you are attempting really hard things like your compound, complex, or complex sentences, but you make a lot of mistakes or hesitation and you forget the letter S or don't pronounce this, then your execution is going to lower this. So you do try to add variety, but you're not executing it well. You want to be careful with that. And also on here, if you do something like a lot of simple things or simple and compound, but you execute it very well, that could show that you are using your grammar in an automatic way, this autopilot way, and you're speaking well and confidently and fluently. So these can be to your benefit, to your advantage for for your overall speaking. But you want to find this balance of a variety of simple, compound, complex sentences so that your grammar is basically in the background, serving you, helping you, and that you're showing that you can use the language well. You have a variety of vocabulary and these different word forms, nouns, adjectives, verbs, adverbs, and you can use the variety in those forms as well. And when you combine all of that, that is the language use element. So I hope this has been very informative, hopefully not overwhelming, but hopefully all of these examples have given you a good idea of what is involved in the language use in terms of basic grammar concepts, nouns, adjectives, verbs, adverbs, how they work together, how you can expand your vocabulary range and mix and match the vocabulary words together, and how you can put all those into a sentence, and how you can create the variety with those sentence structures, the simple, compound, complex, compound, complex. So let me just get you this link to this document so you can go back and review this. Yeah. And yes, there is a recording of this. I'm going to be putting this on YouTube. And yes, if you want, you can send me a message or send me an email to make sure that I can get you the link to the video. But yeah, if there are any questions here, then I'll be happy to answer those. But otherwise, I also want to be mindful of your time and thank you for being here on today. And I wish you all the best for your TOEFL preparations, your speaking practice, and if you need further help practicing this, I am planning to put together some small groups, and yeah, you're definitely welcome for the information. Yeah, this is very cool. Thanks for hosting this. You're welcome. And yeah, how can I reach? Yeah, how can I reach out with you? Yeah, so if you can send me an email here, then we can get in touch. Jonathan@hugginsinternational.com. And I do provide further TOEFL training and groups. Very helpful, yeah. And where there'll be speaking group lesson, yes, I'm planning to open those soon. I'll be posting a message with that. And also, there is a previous delivery workshop that I did, and soon I want to be getting the materials ready for the topic development workshop as well, since that's getting into like how exactly, once you take these elements of delivery and the language use, vocabulary, sentence structure, grammar, now how do you take all of that? If you have that foundation in place, how do you structure what idea should you put first, and then what do you follow that with, and how do you add an example, and how do you kind of put a conclusion? Lots of students end up just wanting a template, but I'd like to follow up on this idea and say, okay, how would I structure this at a really good level? Not just one simple template that doesn't always kind of fit everything, but as a methodology, as an approach, what could you do for that? Okay. Yes, you're very welcome. And yeah, I'll get in touch with you, and yeah, feel free to reach out, and I'll have more updates about some small groups, and also this coming up workshop for topic development. Yeah, all the best to you and your speaking practice, and yeah, hope this has been helpful and that you get your scores, your top scores if possible. Great. Thank you for your time, and I'll see you soon.